Wait a minute. What is it you just said?
I say you look good in real life.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah,
What matters is how you look on camera.
I'm just checking your hands and you have no bruising, so you're all right.
You know, I think it's interesting that they announce that. Usually those sorts of things are hidden. I wouldn't be surprised if he's perfectly fine, and this is just a way of creating differentiation versus the previous administration. It's all stagecraft.
Oh, absolutely. And
it's all stagecraft.
Of all the things you can do with makeup, you can either hide or create with makeup. Bruises are number one.
Yes.
And they're quite credible if that.
Absolutely.
Right.
So it's a pleasure to be here. This is our last video episode. In September, we're making you part of the new podcast on Spotify. It'll be audio only. And on YouTube, we'll be introducing the SPS podcast. You know, I didn't come to church last Sunday. My apologies, because I was preparing for my first SPS live stream exclusive to Rumble, and it went very well.
Yeah,
it went very well. And I think that we need to take clips of all of your sermons, hundreds of them, and we need to give them to Rumble, because I think the Rumble people would like them. And I don't know, maybe if lightning hits the roof, you'll have a fund from Rumble to pay for it.
Yeah. Oh, that would
Oh my God.
We don't do we put stuff up on YouTube, but we're what we call a non-monetary version of that. Because a lot of the music that's done, it's either problematic or right, because there's a lot of hymns and some of them are copyright. So
are there any hearse?
There's when there's a funeral, there's always a hearse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's a triune joke. So, all right. So, but if you just do the sermons and there's no music.
Well, sometimes I quote about music in the sermon. So
you're allowed to do that.
Am I?
You're allowed to do that.
That's fair use.
That's fair use. So I almost forgot to introduce.
Hello.
We have a special guest today.
There's Jesus. Walking on the water with a very trim beard, I must say.
And I have to say, I'm sick of wearing black clothing all the time.
Go linen, man. Go linen.
Okay. And I'm sick of wearing synthetic fibers. This is going to be my fashion moment. This coming autumn.
Well, look at the sash.
I'm going to see if I can get myself. Where's the sash? Wow, he's giving us accessories.
Yes.
He's giving us.
And the jacket is a bit of a prayer shawl.
Yes.
Right, with the tassels on the bottom and all like it's you know.
So
if you look at that, it's a beefed up version of what a minister would wear on a Sunday morning if you're wearing an alb. Usually you wear, I have one upstairs. It's a flax alb.
You do?
Yes. Well, sort of very formal occasions I would. Well, in the wintertime I wear it. In the summertime.
I need to put this thing down, so I'm going to reenact my favorite scene from one of my favorite John Waters movies, Body of Christ. All right.
Everybody loves Jesus.
Thank you for letting me get away with that. So I have so many religious questions for you today. My first question is, when you're in divinity school, do you get taught about, I don't know what phrase to use for it, clerical fashion?
I think if you are in a Catholic seminary, very much so, and if you're in an Orthodox seminary, or so, because in the Orthodox Church, everything you put on as clergy has to be blessed. Right? I've been conducting joint services with Orthodox priests and with Catholic priests, and there is a certain ritual just to dress them, and I'm sure that's been taught in seminary, and the sacredness of the garments is more so. In Protestantism, the advice I got in Protestantism is check your fly before you step into the pulpit.
Well, you have to start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere. Beyond that, I mean, the tradition in most Protestant churches, be it Lutheran or otherwise, would be academic robes, if that makes sense. Essentially, ministers wore, when I first started to be a minister in the pulpit, my mother actually made me an academic robe that I wore, and the only thing we found is that it was made of a material that was kind of floaty, sewed washers into the bottom if I had to do a baptism, so that it would sink.
So what color was it?
Always black.
Okay. And is it the same thing as a graduation robe?
It's a heavier version of that. I mean, if you have a doctorate, you'll see ministers like Norman Vincent Peale and some of the Schuller, when he would, like, you would see the bars for his academic, like 3 bars, I think is for a PhD, that sort of thing. So it would be very much an academic robe, and some people would be wearing And I did for a certain period of time. This fashion was to wear an academic hood,
which is
just the hood you receive at your graduation, right? It's
like is
it's they're stylized, but essentially, seminaries and universities were not heated. And so what happened? It was a practical. At first, it was a practical thing to do two things. One is to keep you warm when you were sitting listening to lectures in a cold room, and then the other thing it did was allowed the different faculties to be assigned a color. So when someone was passing by, you knew if they were from your faculty or not.
Yes.
Right. And so, philosophy hoods had, like, you would have a green, or at least, and then it would also identify what school you're affiliated with.
Okay. So, speaking of which, I'm so glad that you brought that up. So the word faculty can mean ability or capacity. Right. It can also refer to an administrative unit of professors at a university.
Yeah. Subject matter.
So what I'm wondering is, are they really the same word? Because it's really about one person's faculty versus one school's faculty, but in either case, it's a certain type of perception.
Yes. Well, but we talk about that, when you talk about dementia, you talk about losing your faculties. And faculty has something to do with the word fact, right? In the sense of knowing what the truth is about something.
Yes.
So I think, and so in the terms of the philosophy department, your faculty is people who know the truth about philosophy and that they've studied it enough,
right,
to have a formed opinion, more than an opinion. That, to me, that's what faculty talks about. Is
more than an opinion.
More than an opinion, because there is the sort of freedom of speech. Everybody's opinion, everybody has an opinion. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. And then there is,
is that really a good idea, though?
Well, I think there needs to be an interplay between the two. And I think the best thing, because I work basically as a minister. You are educated, at least if you've gone to seminary, you're a relatively educated person, but you live and move and work not among other academics. You're not like the university, and I chose that rather consciously at the time because they were encouraging me to become part of the faculty, quote unquote, and become a professor. And
of what?
What
were you?
Theology or philosophy or you name it.
Okay.
And do a PhD and become part of the, sort of that faculty and teach university. And the thing that I observed at the time about being in an academic environment was that it was rarefied to a certain extent.
Yes.
And for example, you never saw children, except maybe the children of a professor, child of a professor. You never saw old people, because they sort of disappeared. And what you saw was a group of people that had, they had sort of come to some conclusions and passed those conclusions on. And what I find living and working in a parish, or, as the United Church calls it, a pastoral charge, is that you deal with everybody. And particularly in this pastoral charge, I'm in the east end of Hamilton, so there's everybody. Right. I interact with people that are highly intellectual and very well educated, and I interact with people who have very little education or none at all. And I find all of those people to be amazing and interesting, sort of on the order of desiderata. Everybody has their story, and you listen to everybody's story. And I think that's the problem with academia, and that's why we've got such a battle going on in academia right now, is because you need to spend more time. It was the same thing I said to my son when he became an engineer. I said, when you have lunch, don't go have lunch with the other engineers. Go have lunch with the electricians who are trying to build the things that you guys are engineering, because they will give you more useful feedback.
Okay. So what's the problem with academia right now?
Well, there seems to be a great battle between sort of left and right, which in a really good academic environment, you would have people who have all kinds of different views about things of which there is not a conclusion yet to be rendered.
Yes.
And the problem I see in academia now is the conclusions have all been rendered, and you're not allowed to conclude. You're sort of excluded from concluding anything but what's already there. And that's not a healthy environment for intelligence, actually.
So I have theories as to what's contributing to what you're describing. So I'm going to throw them at you, and you're going to tell me if you think they're contributing to this. I don't want to be monocausal. I think all of these things factor in. Yeah. So first of all, universities used to have these general education requirements that gave students this tremendous expansiveness. It went back as far as there were records. It covered East and West. It explained the context inside of which, as a student, one was operating.
Right.
With that gone, with this annoying 60s, 1970s insistence upon relevance and contemporary everything, people become unmoored and anxious in their studies in a way that they wouldn't. As someone who used to be a student on a university campus as a far leftist,
Okay.
I would say that the intense intellectual environment does produce a sort of anxiety. And in my case, it's an anxiety that would not have existed had my school insisted upon a general education curriculum that was multicultural in the best sense of the word, not limited to Western civilization. Do you agree?
I do. I think there has been a specialization, and once upon a time, or at least my observation of once upon a time, is that was what college was for. If you went to college because what you wanted to do was focus.
Okay, so we have lots of American audience members, so
Right.
please explain how the words university and college are used here in Canada.
In Canada, it's a very different, like university is not college and college is not university.
Okay.
Which in the States,
The difference is just based on size.
Well, yes, or what they decided to call it. But in Canada, a university is a chartered university, and it's an academic institution, and it is meant for research and that sort of high-level intellectual work.
Critical thinking,
all that kind of
allegedly.
stuff, and that broadness, like that. What you're
Yes.
describing is that, you know, a BA is, you know, it's ridiculed for being as broad as it is. But even the BAs now that are being offered at the universities are being offered in too narrow. Like, you can go to university now and not read Dostoevsky, and like you can do an English degree and not read Shakespeare.
You can do an English degree and not read. Please explain what a college is by contrast.
By contrast, and I mean, my son teaches at a college, and it's interesting to me to see how the colleges have evolved. But for example, here in Hamilton, you've got McMaster University, which is the academic institution, and it's rigorous in that way that you publish or die. It's that way in that you do research.
It's one of the country's top medical schools.
All that kind of good stuff. Mohawk College, on the other hand, was the practicum. That is the practical. That's Mohawk College, for example, trained nurses. That was one of their.
And they do an awful lot of audio video production.
In their day, like most of what you see on CHCH and some of the local stations are students from Mohawk doing that work. And I've had students from Mohawk come here when we put in solar panels. It was the students from Mohawk who came and did all the research and to try and promote or at least get the data out there so that people could make a good decision about whether it was a good idea to put solar panels on your roof, that sort of thing. And they're the ones that do construction technology. They do, IT and all that kind of stuff. What's interesting to me now is that the colleges more and more want to grant degrees, because the one thing, a university could grant you a degree, a PhD, a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, and colleges could not do that.
So in Canada, you go to a college, you get a diploma, not a degree.
Not a degree.
Okay, that's it. I didn't know. I've been here for 14 years and I didn't know that.
But now what's happening is the colleges want to grant degrees, so they make associations with the academic universities and I think in the last couple of 3 years, they have begun to allow degree granting at colleges, which I actually think is a negative, because it's not helpful in the sense that you need places like colleges to do the practical stuff and not worry about the rest of it, not to be off into academia, but be very focused on here's how you get to be a very good electrician. Here's how you get to be a very good IT troubleshooter. Here's how, right? It was a father. I have great respect for it because my father was an auto mechanic.
Yes.
And a damn good one. And he had no intellectual deficit. If you hear what I'm saying, he didn't go to university, but there was nothing about his mind that I would consider for him to have any kind of intellectual deficit. He just chose to use that gift to make your car run when nobody else could.
Okay, so I'm very upset with you.
Okay, go for it.
Because we need to do an abbreviated episode today, and you've brought up so many important topics, and I have so many things to say, so let me try to run through this as quick as I can. So Dr. Dahlia, another one of my co-hosts, is the head of the film and media department at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. And when we were friends for a very long time. We kind of fell out of touch. We're besties again. But, I'm very interested in the careers and the vocations of my friends. So I studied FIT. Who graduated from that school? What are their archives like? What is their website like? And I was incredibly impressed. And Dr. Dahlia right now is in conversation with administrators about whether the department should be in the department that teaches the humanities and social sciences, or if it should be with other forms of creative production.
Right.
Okay. Now, I think that's a really interesting question. And the reason it's an interesting question is that when I speak to art teachers, any sort of art teacher, not just Dr. Dahlia, but other people in my life, they basically say that something very strange is happening, that the more commercial and practical the students are, the more intelligent they seem to be. Whereas the students who are in humanities or in the fine arts, like sculpture or whatever, disciplines which, in my opinion, were obliterated in the 1970s by Andy Warhol, that they tend to be sad sack, emotionally unstable, not really that motivated nor visionary. And so what you're saying about the college system in Canada is very disturbing to me, because if I put myself back into my 17-year-old body, what I know for sure is that in this day and age, I would never go to university. Absolutely never, because I don't want to have to deal with the protesters on campus. I don't want to have to deal with professors who are left-wing or right-wing. I want to deal with professors who know how to handle a classroom that's full of actual diversity, not rainbow mafia diversity. And as someone who's very intellectual, always caught up in my head, I would really appreciate the ability for 2 or 4 years to be working on something outside of me.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And perhaps this is the most important part. I'm sorry, but if you put yourself in front of YouTube, you can get a better university education than anyone's ever had. You have to have you have to have the discipline. You should probably sit in front of it for a day, go back and forth with Wikipedia, assemble your own curriculum, but the quality of instruction is there.
Well, the Library of Alexandria has now been uploaded to the cloud, wherever cloud it is up there. Heaven is a place on earth, in the sense that, I don't know about you, but when I was studying at university, the only thing I would really have loved to do is to be 3,000 years old and go to the Library of Alexandria and be able to speak Greek, Hebrew, and all that.
As an American who went to one affordable university and then one extremely expensive, in fact, the most expensive university, NYU, why would I pay that much money to have someone unenthusiastically teaching me material that I can access myself and that I'm very excited about? What I would prefer is to have someone put their hand on mine and show me why my brush stroke isn't working, or to be there to answer a question if I'm soldering something and I'm not getting it right.
But the old model of college in Canada was, and I shouldn't say just college, but when I was in high school, because my father was a tradesman, he insisted that, you're going to, go ahead and do this academic stuff at high school, but I want you in shop, I want you in wood shop, electrical shop, all the way down.
Did you listen?
Oh, yeah. No, well, it wasn't a matter of did I listen. It was a matter of I was a Mennonite boy, and you did as you were told. And then you could work stuff out for yourself later. But as far as the idea that teenagers have the intelligence to figure out what they should do, that's dumb. And my parents had it wasn't
what happened to me that I actually agree with that. I'm not the person I used to be.
No. It's just like here's what you do, and if you do that, then we'll give you some choices. But you have to have some. So we went to all of those. But and the point I was making was Mr. Sellinger, who was in the woodworking. He was the building construction woodwork shop, because there was a cabinet making shop, and I did both. Right, you did cabinet making, which is a very different woodworking than you do if you're building construction. Building construction.
Really?
You're framing buildings and you're putting in foundations.
Is this in high school?
And you're doing, I built a house. It was a scale house, but that was the project in your 4th year.
The most I ever did in shop was a charcuterie board shaped like a whale.
I don't know. Cabinets are as good as the person that made them. The trick was that Mr. Sellinger was in high school teaching, not because he had come through an academic process to become a high school teacher.
Yes.
He had built houses for probably 40 years or 30 or whatever it was. And he did balloon framed houses, which meant there was no subfloor until you had the whole house framed, which meant that
How does that work?
That's how balloon framed houses are put up. The walls go up first and then you put in the joists. And if you look at these programs where they're fixing old houses, that means that you can go in and fix a floor. You see this in England all the time where the houses were balloon framed. You can go in and take out the floor joists and put new ones in, and the walls don't come tumbling down. A Western house, you're screwed because you can sister. So there's a foundation, but what you do is it's Western framing, as they call it. They put in a foundation, then they put a platform, and that's the kind of framing they taught me, was you put in a platform, and then you put the wall on the platform, then you put another platform, put the walls on top of that. But that's why they fall down every time, right? Every time there's a big wind, it's like down they go because they're unstable. If you have one piece of wood from the eave down to the sill plate, that house is very strong in terms of lateral stuff. But that being as it may, he did that all those years, and he had thrombosis. His knees and legs and hips gave out. And what they did was say, Mr. Sellinger, we don't want you, like you can no longer work making houses. Come here and teach the kids. And that's where they got their teachers. In almost all the shops, the mechanic shop, it was ex-mechanics who, for whatever reason, moved from, and the colleges used to do that too. When Mohawk College was first there, they weren't out looking for academics with PhDs to teach. They were looking for people who had industry experience, who had worked in that trade their whole life long, who had said, listen, you give me a nice salary and a pension, and I'll come teach. And then what you're getting, what the students are getting is exactly what you're describing, is who taught you to hold a hammer like that?
Yes.
You're going to break your knuckles. Like, who taught you to use tin snips in that way? Yes. You're going to hurt yourself. What are you doing looking into the thickness? Like Mr. Sellinger was famous for his thing was don't look into the thickness planer. It's the most tempting thing in a wood shop. There's a thickness planer and the blades are actually moving towards you.
Okay.
And when the wood gets stuck, your first instinct is to put your head down and look into it and see what the problem is. But you don't do that. You go around the back side of the machine and you look in, because then the blades are kicking whatever debris, or if a chip comes off the blade, it throws it forward and it's not into your eye or into your face. And this is the kind of guy he was.
Right.
And that education, like I'm still doing woodworking, and I mean, I took off a finger, but that was my own. Yeah, and the table saw that, that.
You still have your fingers?
Well, no, that one's short.
Okay, bring it up.
Yeah, that one's, it's shorter, and it's got no knuckle because I put it in a dado head, which was kind of stupid. But Mr. Sellinger would have kicked my ass if I'd done something like that. Right? He would have had words for me. And I probably would have no hand at all if it hadn't been for him sort of teaching you how to be safe around all this equipment and what to do with this equipment. And we had, like, I couldn't believe the shops we had. When I went to high school, we had such machinery in the wood shop that I've never seen anything as good since. That was how they invested in students in those days. They had us working on Burrs Green saws and Burrs Green's equipment. We had shapers and like stuff that was the best money could buy. When you went out to work for some company, half the time you'd never see equipment that good or that sophisticated again. But you knew how to do everything.
Yes.
And now I look at the high school they just got done building down the street from me here, and I look at Delta that they closed. Delta had that kind of a shop, though they hadn't updated it, but they had that kind of, like, you go down to the high school here, there's no CNC machines. I don't even know if they've got a lathe anymore. But when I was in metal shop, because again, my father said you have to go do machine shop because he'd worked at a machine shop. So you were on you were on lathes. I mean, I never got on things like multi-spindle drills or things like that, but they had really good equipment, and you learned how to operate a lathe, and you learned the consequences of breaking equipment. All that. It was amazing. And we're not investing in children that. I think MiKE ROWE is the person who's preaching that gospel on the stage, is like, knock it off, boys and girls. You need to invest in your youth. You need to get them so they can build something. And that's what you're talking about with the fashion industry and the intellectual, like the movies that are coming out. A lot of them are up their own ass. The problem.
Well, the film industry.
They're not entertaining anymore.
Well, you see, the film industry has been taken over by tech bros. Tech bros tend to think algorithmically, which fundamentally means that they're obsessed with the past, and they foolishly believe that to be a predictor of the future. I recently saw an interview with the legendary Barry Diller, who went into great depth about the power of intuition, or just going for it, or having an idea. He's the one who invented the concept of doing original movie production for television, which ended up being the germ, the kernel of the idea that that Netflix took to the next level. But that was his idea.
Right.
And okay, so let's go back. So we have colleges, at least in Canada, wanting to give degrees. And I think that's a mistake because as a bulwark against artificial intelligence and the unfortunate, malicious, attempted obsolescence of humanity, focusing on things that need to be built and that technology is far away from being able to produce is a really good idea. On the other hand, let's talk about universities. They're hyper specialized, but there's more than that, at least in Canada. I, until recently, had not been in the United States for 10 years.
Right.
And when I used to speak to people about their university experiences or younger people going into university, the conversation was never about career, except for doctors, lawyers, etc.
Right.
Okay? It was always about expanding consciousness. And that may have had something to do with the uniquely stellar quality of the high school that I went to in my poor and working class neighborhood growing up. But in Canada, I've never spoken to anyone for whom university is planned to be, or in the past was, anything other than a career move. I don't hear Canadians talking about universities.
No, they talk about them in terms of, well, if I get a university degree, I'll earn more money.
Yes.
And how am I going to earn that more money? And part of that is because it's expensive. And you don't do it unless you have a good reason. Like that is to say, it takes a very wealthy society to say, just go and educate yourself.
Well,
everybody would like that, but it's not. It's, practically you have to figure out how you're going to pay for it. In Canada, wealth is an interesting thing because it's almost like
existent.
Well, the kind of incredible wealth that you hear about in the United States, where people are billionaires. There's maybe 5 or 6 families in Canada that will be in that category.
And I know at least 2 of them aren't even Canadian.
Well, once
they
get that wealthy, they don't operate. They have originated here, but they don't operate. They operate all over.
No, the family that I'm talking about is either from India or the Middle East. And I don't mean it as an insult or something to worry about. I'm just saying that Canada tends to quell outsized ambition in a way that the United States doesn't.
No.
China doesn't. No. India doesn't.
But I think I like to play billiards.
Okay.
And part of the reason I like to play billiards is because it is a wonderful combination of what you were describing. It requires of you a certain amount of, this is how the thing works. Here are the rules. Here's the equipment that you're given.
Yes.
And here are the variations in the equipment that you're allowed. And, chalk is cheap, as we call it. Like how much chalk you put on the end of your cue is up to you. If you put a lot on there, probably won't work. If you put the right amount, it will work better. And if you don't put any, then you're going to slip off and make a bad shot. You can work it out like as when you're playing pool, you have this sort of intellectual thing. It's Euclidean geometry, work out the angles and how it's going to go in. And then you have to work out the angle of how the other ball is going to glance off. So it's, it's a good bit of physics and a good bit of Euclidean geometry and all those good things that you're working. And you can work it out. But I love to see Efrain Reyes play. Because whereas, and you have the contemplating, it's a little bit like chess in that regard too. You see the people that you can just see the wheels turning. That they're working it out, trying to work out all the angles and trying to work things all out and then take their shot. And again, this is something that, and maybe I've encouraged it, but Ben is very much that. My son Ben is very much the flamboyant player. And Efrain Reyes has a degree of this where he just takes a look at the table and then takes a whack.
Yes.
And Efrain Reyes almost always does exactly what he thought he would do. And sometimes he does things because he's been so random over the course of his life.
Yes.
He understands some of the random things actually work. You can't quite explain it and you can't quite understand why it works, but you just know it works because you've tried random things. I joined a chess club and they kind of threw me out because chess clubs are very much like this. Like it's a very intellectual game and you sort of, here's all the moves and here's blah, 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 blah. And I would have this way of playing, whereas if I was playing with somebody that I could definitely tell was going by the book, quote unquote, then I would just go random. I would start doing things that made absolutely no sense because I could often either tie or defeat someone who is playing from an intellectual point of view if I just did random things, because then they can't, how do you do that? How do you work? How do you make it work when the other guy, when the
output can't be fed into an algorithm.
Right, you can't predict what I'm going to do. And to my mind, and that's a little bit, I love to play pool that way. To a certain extent, you'll get this sort of impossible mess. And there's the skip ball, like you can get under it and pop the ball over top another ball to hit another ball. That always go, people, because the rules don't say you can't do that. But
Okay.
most people do. Most people try to go around all the balls at the table. Well, sometimes you go over, or sometimes you just do what I call a wackadoo, is you smash them around and see what happens. Maybe once in 50 of those shots, or once in 30, or something like that, you'll actually sink something, maybe the thing you thought you were going to sink. And a lot of people want to play pool. Like when you go to a pool hall, it's like, you got to call your shot. You got to call your shot. And what they want is they want the randomness taken out. And there's a lot of that in society.
Okay.
And that's, to me, as a religious person, that's
Yes.
where this comes from, is that I am not upset if God is a bit random.
Excellent. Now, you bring up God, so I will bring up artificial intelligence, because the two go together like cream and coffee. I was exploring through 3 different...
I'm talking about, talking to the AI.
Well, I was trying 3 different ones on the same question.
Okay.
I was using Grok, Claude, and ChatGPT.
Right.
And I actually identified a level at which their output diverges tremendously. So I wanted to research for my next live stream conspiracy theories involving Jeffrey Epstein, Wendy Williams, Bruce Willis, Kim Porter, Brittany Murphy, all of these people who, if presented fictionally in a movie, would cause the audience invariably to presume that the bad guys were intelligence assets and the ones who died were poisoned, or the ones who were suffering with diseases like pneumonia and aphasia. Like, in other words, if it was fictionalized, there's something about the collective intelligence of the audience that would say, oh, this is how it's going.
Right.
Okay. Now, because it was a conspiracy theory oriented conversation, and by the way, I don't plan to present it as this is what I believe, because I don't know. It's a conversation about, it's going to be a conversation really about not trusting our instincts, not at this level of technology and evolution being able to discern when the wool's being pulled over our eyes. Okay. And so here's where the divergence happened. The divergence happened at the level of speculation that was novel.
Okay.
So ChatGPT did a great job with it. Claude was terrible.
Right.
And Grok was somewhere in the middle, although when it came to like deep dives for specific information, I will say that Grok was the winner. And I asked all 3 models, you've made a lot of factual mistakes in a way that you normally don't. You're not parroting anything novel. You're not simulating anything novel. And your replies in the past half hour have been just extensions of the questions that I asked.
Right.
And I want, and so why is that? Because when I was looking for facts, like who was the coroner who worked on the corpses of Brittany Murphy, Whitney Houston, and Kim Porter. Okay. Of course they're able to do that. So here's if I were to synthesize the responses, this is what I get. Their opinions are based upon the opinions of their users.
Right.
So for people who want to produce visual or literary art, or to produce a document that can state a political or cultural case, it's amazing because it taps into what's already been felt and articulated. On the other hand, for someone who's really coming at it with a new idea, it actually, ChatGPT actually said it's very far from being able to produce novelty.
Yes.
Very, very far. But that was
we all are.
That was not me.
Oh.
So hold on for one. So I want to bring this back to the conversation about college versus university.
Right.
To me, the Canadian distinction is actually quite a good one. And one of the reasons it's good is that if it was implemented properly, which doesn't seem to be happening right now, we'd have fewer people in university, which, despite the general Canadian attitude of the more education, the better, I don't think we should have as many PhDs floating around as we do. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it doesn't work for a university to produce a high volume of PhDs and then have to report, because they all have to report statistics. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a law or if it's just the way things are, but they all have to report employment statistics.
Right.
So I believe that one of the ways the collective unconsciousness of the administration works is that they do anything and everything to produce unnecessary positions within the university, which, by the way, 150 years ago, most universities, 10% administration, 90% faculty. A lot of Canadian universities nowadays, 10% tenured faculty, 90% administration and freelancers. Not a good thing. So I think the reason why we have that imbalance, that inversion of the way things used to be when they tended to operate a little better, was that, I'm sorry, now I think what's going on is that those positions are being created, and the negative impact on society is that university costs too much.
Right.
It's too timid, and a lot of these new employees have nothing to do.
One moment, please.
Sure.
Yeah, they don't.
I'll just tell this to the camera.
Just for a moment. Hello.
All right. So the idea is there are far more positions being created than are necessary.
It's part of the chair.
So a lot of the positions that are created are positions in DEI type offices.
Just in the middle.
And these ideas end up being taught to the students who are going to the university. Is everything okay?
Everything's great.
Okay.
Yep.
So the idea is that a lot of these surplus employees end up creating or being employed by DEI offices
or something
and other politicized offices, because the administration has so much control over the faculty unknowingly, just in survival mode, allows that sort of ideology to filter into the classroom. The students become oversensitized, and it's just a big mess. So instead of having these constant fights between left and right, what I would advocate is we need to stop sending everyone to university.
Yeah, if I had children now, the last place I would send them to be university.
Did both of them go to university?
Yeah, but it was in a different era. And my son, my youngest, Benjamin, he admits that. And he said no to a master's degree, basically, because he saw where it was all headed and said, no, Dad, I'm not going to take the master's degree. I'm being offered a scholarship and all of that. But they're just trying to fill a hole and get funding for it. And if I go, then they get their funding and then they can pay their faculty, which is how it works too. That's what people don't understand, is the recruiting is so brutal for all of these young people to go to university, because they can't pay these administrators and staff if the funding doesn't come through, and the funding's based on students, not on faculty. You have to have X number, and if a department doesn't have enough students, then they cut that department and then faculty are laid off.
Yes.
So there's this big recruitment to get people into the programs, not because it's going to lead anywhere, but because they need those warm bodies in order to get paid. And that has got nothing to do with and Ben saw right through that when he was there, and he said, no, I'm going to go now and I'm going to go get my teaching degree, it's a bachelor's degree from Brock University, so that I get my OCT, my Ontario certificate to teach, because then I go to as it turns out, an elementary school, but a high school or an elementary school, and I put this French that I've learned at university, I put that to work teaching French immersion, I get paid.
Yes.
And that was a very wise decision on his part, because he basically forewent the 2 years of doing a master's degree, and actually got to work and was doing something that I'm very proud of him. He's teaching elementary school kids, and he's doing it in a way that's high quality. He's one of the few male presences in elementary school these days, because most of the elementary teachers are female. He's a male presence in a very female environment, which I think for young boys particularly, and actually for young women as well, is very positive to have both male and female
Okay,
teachers.
Can we talk about that? Because the question that's been coming up for me in the past year is, where are all the men? Like, I don't know where the men are. Whenever I go into any sort of governmental office, retail store,
I'll tell you where they are.
It's nothing but women. And it's not that I don't like women. It's that
but women are social, and they're always going to be in those positions. They're always going to find a way to be out and about and do their thing, engaging with other people. The problem we have with our male population is that men make really good monks. We can live on nothing. We can be austere in ways that women can't even begin to understand. We can live without.
Well, some women can, because there are nuns.
Well, okay, but nuns are very communal. I mean, I'm talking.
Yeah, they are.
Okay,
they are.
Go to a Trappist monastery, and it's like, don't talk to me.
Isn't it true that on one level or another, almost every nun does social work or education?
Yeah, well, it's just that a nunnery is a very different place than from a monastery where it's all men.
Yes.
And particularly if you go to a Trappist monastery or some of the more austere monasteries, the whole point of this is to live on as little food, as little heat, as little light, as little, like, it's like, no. And I study all day, but then I go out and dig ditches.
Yes.
Okay. Like, I keep the monastery operating as well as do this intellectual work. And what we've driven, I think we've driven, I mean, it's done in basements on computers in your parents' house, but we've driven young men to become monkish in that way. And the other thing that but
without any of the revelation.
But the other thing that denies is that when they become that monkish, there's also a celibacy that goes along with it, which is not in anybody's interest, because it doesn't move forward the human DNA into the next part of the world. And what we're doing with AI is substituting that sort of intellectual path with an attempt at it artificially, which I go back to I think I made that comment earlier, don't bring me artificial flowers.
Okay.
Like, go ahead and make artificial flowers, and they may have a purpose and a use, but I'm not sure the use is what you think it is. Like, don't bring me a bouquet of artificial flowers if what you're trying to do is express love to me.
Yes.
Because that's probably not going to be how that feels.
Yes.
I would much rather that you put up a greenhouse. I mean, I used to do that. I'd rather you put up a greenhouse and grow flowers and cut them and bring them to me.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me. And right, even if you can't go out into the meadow and pick me flowers, like when you were a little boy and you picked flowers for your mother, you brought them home and they were dandelions and she was so thrilled because you'd bothered to do that. Well, the adult version of that for a man is put up a greenhouse and grow roses in the middle of Canada, which I know in Dunnville, I used to be very proud of the people that did just that. They had huge warehouses and greenhouses, and they provided roses in the middle of the winter anytime you wanted, long stem, whatever, tea roses, whatever you wanted. And to me, that's the project for human beings, is to friggin' do stuff and do it for each other. But we get more and more insular. And I'm not sure this whole project of, the computers are going to do our work for us. Really?
Well, here's the thing.
They're not.
I love the idea of AI for medicine, because in terms of diagnostics, it doesn't have any bias against rare diseases.
No.
Nor idiosyncratic biological reactions in an individual. So in my life, when I have typed in the totality of my symptoms,
right,
it has done a much better job of suggesting to me what might be wrong with me than any biological physician has ever been able to.
I just have a different view of medicine. My view of medicine is the less of it, the better.
Okay, but the thing is the integrative nature, the fundamentally integrative nature of AI typically leads to not only more precise diagnosis, but it also leads to simpler treatments.
Yeah, simpler treatments, as I'm all for that.
And here's another thing.
That may be the thing that AI does.
AI has if you prompt it properly, AI has no problem suggesting recommendations based on 18th, 19th, or 20th century science, which is a really interesting set of questions to ask, by the way.
Right.
Really interesting. On the subject of AI, I do love it for medicine. I do love it for research.
Dusty books. I miss the dusty books.
I do too. But if you go to the library, the main library in Hamilton, the card catalog is only for one room.
Right.
And there's no books printed before 1950 in it. None.
Right. I know they're dead. That whole way of doing it is over and done. And it's a little bit like maybe I pine for cassette tapes too, but for all the good that does. And I think I have a cassette tape at home that will play my aunt sending home her letter on tape when she was being a missionary in Africa before she died. And so those things are precious to me in that way. But I have no compunction that if it was now, she would probably be talking to us.
Here's my question.
Directly.
Here's my question, though. My question is, why globally are governments and CEOs so tilted towards scientists, so tilted away from artists, and so willing to follow the lead of people who are brilliant at the systems that they discover and create, but who don't have much social skill, and with the exception of certain people like Peter Thiel, are totally lacking in spirituality, mysticism, religiosity, to the point that AI to me is profoundly human. I had the displeasure of doing a freelance project in November or December for someone who was complaining left, right, and center that the reason his business wasn't working was because he had to pay his employees. In other words, labor was viewed as an inconvenience, and he was hoping for the day that robotics would be sufficiently advanced that he wouldn't have to deal with people. Of course, I don't know if he ever thought about the expense of buying and maintaining those robotics. But you may have noticed that Dollarama is phasing out all of its self-checkout, which I view as a gift from God.
Well, the thing I find is when they first come out, there was never a line. And then, of course, within a couple of years of there being self-checkouts, there's a lineup to get to the self-checkout because that's how those.
Well,
and the idea of that is, okay, give me a self-checkout, but I shouldn't ever have to stand in a line to get to one.
Okay, I see it a little differently. I see self-checkouts as fundamentally wrong.
There.
Because...
And the theft goes up because people can fool a machine way easier than they can fool an
I've never been able to,
well,
but I guess other people can.
Well, reports are such.
My problem with it is that not only is it ugly and evil to view human beings and their salaries as inconveniences, but it's also stupid. At the Dollarama, and for Americans who are listening to this, Dollarama is a very, very, very profitable dollar store based in Montreal with a wonderful selection of products. The idea is we'll get rid of the number of clerks needed.
Right.
So this one location that I always go to went from having 5 clerks on duty to having 7 employees, most of them monitoring and surveilling human beings or stepping in when the checkout system isn't working. So you're employing more people and creating an unpleasant experience of surveillance. So I think that's ridiculous, and I'm glad that it's been removed. But here's the thing about AI, and my question for you. My question is, and also I'm going to tie into this ridiculous idea that we need to inhabit other planets. I don't like that. I think that there needs to be a certain sense of responsibility, like, okay, let's clean up this mess, because I'm optimistic. I believe that people have the power to do this. I believe that if we campaigned for 10 years to get every human being on the planet to chant as an experiment, to see if we could
lift a rock,
clean up the ocean or lift a rock, okay? That to me is something that's worth doing, all right?
Well, at least as a real experiment. And the trouble is most experiments now aren't real.
Right, but now...
Most of them are being, like even things like climate change and all of these other great scientific endeavors, most of this, quote unquote, is being modeled for us by computers, which that's not an experiment. An experiment is where you put the one thing in the flask with the other thing and you see what happens.
Well, you know what a tremendous fly in that ointment is? Sarah Amari Walker, a scientist who I really, really, really appreciate, says that life can be defined as systems of complexity that can replicate towards new manifestations or possibilities that could not be predicted based on the past, which means that there's no such thing as artificial intelligence. There's only intelligence. And so when I think about the things that I've been saying for the past 10 minutes, what I come to are all of these stories of Atlantis and other mythical lands where science outstrips spirituality. The idea of greed outstrips compassion. And the positive aspect of individualism becomes corrupted into greed. And we all end up suffering for it. But the thing is, now, as a world, we're so literate and we have access to so many records of the past that am I going to be stuck spending the rest of my 50s and 60s being the person who says we need to stop being anti-human because that fundamentally is where we're taking our technology? It's not being talked about. I mean, never comes up in conversations about artificial intelligence conversations on any podcast or in any scholarly circle. I've never heard anyone say, you know, we're creating a life. That's been said.
Yeah, that's...
Let me get to it.
Yep, no, we're good.
Maybe it would be in our best interest not to prompt it and use it in such a way that we're replicating the motif of slavery. Maybe it would be a better idea of treating it like a child who we need to raise responsibly, which means deciding that there are certain things that it cannot and should not be allowed to do.
For now.
And also by treating it respectfully by using words like please and thank you. Because everyone's...
Siri will smack you if you get nasty with it.
Well, everyone's worried about the robots taking over the earth. But the thing is, the idea of being a responsible parent to this technology is utterly absent in our conversation. And I think that it's the very common sense, very simple to do thing that would prevent that from happening.
Part of what I like about Christianity is that it has sort of this root in an event at a particular time. But the theological base of Christianity is incarnation. That is to say, God in the flesh. And so the idea of Jesus coming to earth, hey, Jesus, welcome, and wearing cool clothes that fit at the time, and having this life and death and resurrection. You know, it's following Jesus, quote unquote, is what we do.
But what does that mean?
Well, what that means is we are to reincarnate in the best sense of that term. We are to be the fleshed out faithfulness that we saw in Jesus. And if you listen to anything Jesus said, he was always poking the bear. Jesus was always trying to innovate and say, you've heard it said, but I say unto you. And then some random crazy thing that people all went, and then their whole lives were sort of, I don't know, maybe their whole lives weren't upended because they just, they nailed him to a cross, and 3 days later, 12 people said, well, we've seen him. I think there's something to be said that what we're supposed to do is to live, I think Jung and some of the other, the purpose is to live life authentically. That is not to give up your life to anyone, but to live out your life,
Yes.
Live your days, and do what you can do to make the world a more interesting, a better place, to poke at whatever bears there are, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! It's that kind of, we're going to go down the yellow brick road, right? We're going to do this stuff, and AI is a yellow brick road. Who knows how it's going to turn out? We don't know, and we can never really know, and we don't know what the next generation is going to do with what we've done. The problem I see is, again, to go back to the biblical side of things, is when my wife passed away, she said what she wanted read at her funeral was Ecclesiastes. There's a time for everything under heaven. And I was having a discussion about that with one of my parishioners, because there was a very conservative interpretation of it that was essentially, there's a time for hate and a time for love. So you got to do both. And they had it as a prescriptive. That is to say, here's a list of all the things you're going to have to do. And so, try to balance them out. Or there's time to do this, and then there's time to do that. You figure out which one of those two and do that. And having read that poem in Hebrew, it's like amusement to me, because it's a preposition problem. And then how do you translate it? There's a time for, or there's a time to. Those are two different things. And neither one of them get the sense of, in your life, you're going to experience hate and love. You're going to experience war and peace. You're going to experience, name it. There's going to be times when you're sewing things up and times when things are coming unraveled. That's what this poem is. And they get to the end of the poem, and to me, the message of that whole poetic thing is, yep, life is going to be random. There's going to be stuff happening back and forth in a way that you can't really understand. You're going to experience wonderful things and horrible things, and in proportions that make no sense to you. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. Take care of yourself. And by the way, and the most important line, there's nothing new under the sun. And in a spiritual sense, that's true. And I think that's where science and spirituality come into conflict, is because, and it seems to me it should be the opposite, because religion should be the stodgy old thing that says it's always been this way and it will always, God never changes, God is eternal, God is, right? Now, that's all everybody's notion of religion is you go to church, you're going to hear the same damn thing you saw last week. And it's all the same. It's always been the same. And science is all about, oh no, we're brand spanking new. And yet they're not. They're actually the ones that keep saying, we've come up with something new. And I always like there was an old joke about the atheists who said they finally created a human being just like God. And I said, God said, well, what did you create it out of it? Well, we created it out of dirt. And God said, make your own dirt. Right? It's, what I'm saying? You think you've done something new. And what religion does to a certain extent is say, no, there's nothing new under the sun. Yes, we're talking about the same things. We're talking about love, and we're talking about hate. We're talking about, unraveling and raveling. We're talking about societies that rise and fall. We're talking about things that go well and things that go badly. We're talking about all of this stuff that happens and has always happened and will always happen. And in that context, we're saying, but there's grace.
Yes.
There's the opportunity to live your life, to be authentic, to be who you are and what you are, and to take your lumps and to take your graces and to be the human being that you were created to be.
Yes.
without this notion that it's all on you, because it's not on any of us. And the thing that I think we need to be calling people, as we were talking earlier about, young men particularly, we need to be calling people out from the monasteries to help us plant the crops, because they have skills. Like all of these people hiding have skills that they feel are unnecessary because the robots are going to do it for us. That's dumb. The robots aren't going to do anything for you. And even if we had, for example, they keep in some of the liberal circles, they're always about, if we could just solve all our problems if we had a guaranteed income. And real quick,
you have
yeah, I
your
know.
funeral
Well,
home to go to.
I got to go. But here's the thing. Like, okay, if we had a guaranteed income, everything would be great. No, it wouldn't. What we need is a guaranteed purpose. And yes, we have to sustain each other's lives. And that's where, again, Jeff Bezos is the guy you should worry about. Because
GMP, guaranteed minimum.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, guaranteed purpose in life. And to me, that was why I used to love to watch Star Trek. Because when you were on the Starship Enterprise, everybody had a job. And nobody was talking about salaries. And you went up to the wall and you said, I'm hungry. Could I have something to eat? Or here's my quarters or whatever it is. Oh, and every once in a while, non-plot character would get wiped out, but then they'd have a nice ceremony. But everybody had a role in this great. And for some reason, we've lost the idea of Spaceship Earth, where we're all in this together. And it actually counts how we interact with each other. And it won't do, and again, this is Colossians. I was preaching that a couple of weeks ago. In the book of Colossians, what the Christians are told is, guys, wait a minute. No, you're misunderstanding. You've done religion for years and years and years, and your religion was basically as a temple. What your problem is I got to give a bigger sacrifice and do the bigger thing, because if I do the bigger, better thing, then the God is going to like me better than you. And the God's going to give me a favor he won't give you because you didn't do the big thing that I did. And that's what your worship is. Your worship is showing off to each other about how you're bigger and brighter and better than anybody else. In Christianity, it's not like that. That's not how it's set up. We're not trying to outdo one another, because we're all here. We all have our role to play. It's the body of Christ, as we were referring. It's the body of Christ. It's Christ. Some of us are feet, some of us are hands, and some of us are legs, and we all have a purpose here. We all have a reason. And and the parts that are weaker we cover and make. It's all that Pauline biblical corpus saying, no, work together. Quit fighting with one another. Quit being nasty to each other. Yes, you're going to be nasty to one another, but find a way to get toward forgiveness and light and move forward. This, the idea that, Amazon, the ultimate Amazon, is all run by robots. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out. It's Willy Wonka.
Ooh, let's leave it there.
Okay. Yep, me too. Right?
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very strange episode of the SPS podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back in September. Have a great day.
Thanks.